Hi, Louise here from Boost Your Career. And this is Boost Talk. Welcome. A series of conversations that I have with women who are generously sharing their time, their energy, their strategies, their experience, their own personal stories around career enhancement in this post-pandemic hybrid workplace environment we find ourselves working in. And this morning I was lucky enough to be in conversation with Nadine Castle, who is co-founder and director of the Culture Group. And we had a really interesting conversation that took on many interesting facets around internal confidence, impact, intent, the types of career decisions that women make. Conscious choice was in there. But something that really piqued my interest was we came to the realization that the natural flow of connectedness and engagement that women have is actually a leverage point and a career enhancing move on its own. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Please like and comment. And if you're looking for some more information, head on over to the Boost Your Career website. I look forward to seeing you. Well, good morning. Welcome to Boost Talk. Today I'm speaking with Nadine Castle, who is the co-founder and director of the Culture Group. And we're going to be talking about personal development in the hybrid workplace. So welcome, Nadine, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Louise. Lovely to spend some time with you this morning.
Oh, look, it is. Now, we know one another quite well, which is fantastic. I hope we keep on track for everyone. But as I was saying before we started recording, I've been doing a lot of reading around the research that the Culture Group has published recently. And I believe there's a lot in there that can link through to women and the personal development choices that they make moving forward. So I'm wondering if we could start with one of the key components of this research was an idea that there are currently 3 specific culture issues that are impacting organisations. So I'd love to start there and hear your take on those 3 and how they're impacting organisations. And perhaps we can slip into what that means for women and development. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect. So there's, as you said, there's 3 key factors that are really impacting culture at the moment. And this is predominantly been heightened post the pandemic.
Yeah.
But they are communication and connection, and that's obviously they're critical anytime. But working in a hybrid way of working, when you're not physically together and the construct of your work environment has changed, is really important. The second one is around emotional and mental well-being, and making sure that we have those really honest and authentic conversations around how we're feeling, and making sure that we've got a voice in that and we really proactively look after that. And the third area is around cross-collaboration of teams. So how do we connect, not just inside of our bubble, but with other parts of an organisation, with people that we don't maybe naturally form relationships with. So there's a whole piece around that diversity and inclusion component that sits under, the big broad term of cross-collaboration of teams.
It's really interesting because all of that relates straight back to this, what you called in the research, the hybrid revolution. And that to me is probably one of the pivoting points of a post-pandemic workplace and the changes that it's having on people's psyche and the way that they're developing.
And it's a really interesting concept, this hybrid revolution. And organisations, I still think, are trying to grapple with it. Some are going full on to, yes, either completely remote or hybrid. There's still organisations that need people in the office or still wanting, even though they could work from home. So they haven't quite kind of moving back to where it was beforehand. And that's fine from a conceptual perspective, but from an employee engagement, employee value proposition, people aren't wanting that. They're wanting the opportunity to have an option around that. And the role of the office has changed. So it's what's the purpose of me going in, and how do we create a culture that what people want to go in, rather than it being really driven by policy, and it's actually driven by engagement and connection and communication, and cross collaboration of teams and mental and emotional well-being. Funny about that.
Funny about that. So, see, the language has changed. If we were having this conversation 3 years ago, we'd be talking about offices because that's what they were. Everyone was in the office. And we'd be talking around how to promote yourself in that environment. And for me, the language that I was just hearing from you, that was really different, because we're starting to, and I think that's that emotional well-being that you were talking about, because the word care is now part of our narrative. So that being the case, and the fact that I'm often distanced from the people I'm working with, this medium that we're in today, because I'm in Brisbane, you're in Melbourne, this medium becomes rather important in that engagement process. That's a sort of interesting point, because how does all of that impact the decisions I need to make as an aspiring woman? How does that affect the decisions that I make about my own development now, as opposed to 5-6 years ago?
Yeah, and I think it's really understanding the skill sets required that supports
Yep.
your way of connecting, communicating, growing in this environment. So things like emotional intelligence
Yeah.
becomes really critical, because it's about seeing things that aren't in your, direct sphere. You've got that, and I think women have
Yeah.
an innate, if I want to generalize here, because it is a generalized statement, but they've got an innate ability, when they're conscious about it, to kind of suss where things are at. They could really tap into their sixth sense. So it's looking about, not just about self, but that environmental radar of how other people are showing up. And I think where we're conscious of that, that really taps into our emotional intelligence around, the energy of others, how they're feeling, how am I feeling? So how do I develop that skill in myself to really be attuned to that? So I think that's one critical area of development in terms of underpinning skills. I think there's a whole piece around visibility or lack thereof.
Mhm.
That I think is a real challenge for emerging leaders, young female leaders. We still have some biases towards males. I think that's shifting, but there's still elements of that there. So our visibility is really critical.
Mm.
But how do we be visible when we're not, seeing or connecting with senior
Yeah.
people outside of our sphere when we're not in office?
Mm.
We can do that quite a lot easier when we're physically in the same operating space. So it requires a lot more thought about, well, what choices do I make to get involved in things that are outside my sphere, so I can be seen as visible? What experiences do I need to have? What's my role when I am in the office? And how narrow do I want myself to be, or how open do I want myself to be?
Mm.
Because I've only got a certain amount of opportunity to talk to people that I wouldn't normally talk to in my work context. And so there's a bit of confidence building of self to get that visibility up, so we can make those connections. And I think people on the other side are craving for that. I know a lot of senior leaders, and have worked with a lot of senior leaders over time. People don't talk to them. So I think they really love to hear from, more junior people in their organisations, people that have got a different lens on life and a different point of view. And I think that's what young women can share.
See, even that conversation, which I loved, by the way, because it sparked my imagination and things that I hadn't really thought through. There's an interesting twist even in the language that you're using here, because you started with the word skills. And yet, as soon as you say skills, people think about, business acumen, thinking clearly, strategic thinking, all of those things that used to be incredibly important. Now they're job role specific. And what you were talking about is positioning of self. So how do I take advantage of my current skills, my innate skills? How do I enhance all of those skills so that you talked about, so that my environmental radar becomes more critical and my visibility through me speaking up, and that whole speaking up, speaking out confidence is integral to the boost process.
Absolutely.
And
Yes,
how do I tap into all of that so that I can share well, you were talking with senior leaders, that's a big leap for people, isn't it?
big leap for people. But I think if you break down the barrier of hierarchy,
Yeah.
and go, they're people, is it a big leap? Is it really a big leap? Is it a big leap to be able to, and this is, I think, where I would challenge young women to do, is just go, oh, hi, how are you? My name is, just the general connection bit. That I think we don't do that enough. And at the start, that's all it needs to be. And good questions. Good question. Being able to ask questions is such a skill. And I think it's really an undersold skill that we can have. But I think that natural, authentic, building rapport with someone, and introducing yourself to someone that you haven't met before. I don't think it is a big leap. I think we just forget about, and we get caught up with hierarchy and positional power of the person's role. And I think we also, our narrative gets stuck in they're more important than me. I am just I don't have the experience in, what if they think like this about me, all those kind of narratives. And I think that's the other thing for young women who are starting their careers, is to really get their internal narrative on check, and really because we all have
check's a great way to describe it,
Yeah.
because that whole negative self-talk and the cycle that creates is incredibly damaging. There's no doubt about it. I'm loving that we're talking about the human side of self. That we're not talking, because if you think back to the 90s, the 2000s even, people were very clear around their work persona and their home persona, and they were two incredibly different things, and they created different language sets, different behavioural sets, etc., etc. And I'm not seeing that as much anymore, and I'm wondering if you think that might be a point of confusion or a point of challenge for women, because they're used to decompartmentalizing the different parts of their world. And when you're talking about connecting and being having your environmental radar there and being visible, and I'm wondering if that's something that women could do if they set their mind to it, because it seems pretty natural.
I think they can absolutely,
they can nail it.
Do that. Absolutely. All power to them. Or to us. So absolutely, I think they can do that. I also believe that with this hybrid revolution and this medium, so, we're both in our own environments, a dog will bark, kids will come in, our work and our life is more blended than what it was before. So that now I can't pronounce it, to put us into compartments, or put our life into compartments, is a lot harder to do now, because it's blurring. We're not going to work or walking downstairs or into a different room to work. So I think that then lends us to be more authentic, more of our authentic self, tapping into who we are and building on our own personal skill sets,
Mm.
because that those lines of delineation are no longer so structured.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And my brain, I was just whirling then thinking, well, what are the enablers for women? How would
A
you
really great
describe
question.
what are the
Yeah.
enablers that we can grasp that will allow the professional development that's required in this new hybrid revolution world?
Yeah, I think some of the enablers, if I start with self, and I always think this is really important. Yes, there's um, elements organizations need to help,
Yeah.
but it's what can we control?
Yep.
It goes back to the old circle of influence, circle of
That
control.
does too. Yeah.
It's what's our locus of control,
Mm.
um, and I think if I was talking to my younger self, going back to my early career days, I'd be talking about my power. I'd be talking about my voice. I'd be going, you've got this, and really building into my own confidence and not get bamboozled from the big wide world of work and where I fit in that, and had that kind of really inner self belief. So I think there's a whole bit of self
Mm.
that we need to start with, and that from a belief system, from a sense of power, sense of advocacy of self. And then I think there's a bit around consciousness, and being quite conscious about how we're going to develop our skill set, being quite conscious around our decision making, um, through, as I said before, through this hybrid way, what choices am I going to be making to develop my career? What opportunities can I put myself hand up to do? What experiences can I do? How can I ask great questions
Yeah.
in meetings to
Mm.
show that I have got interest in what's going on, rather than being a passive passenger, which we can easily be, because it's easy, because
Yeah.
other people can hold the floor. So what's the one or two questions that I can ask myself of myself, ask myself of the in the right moment? So I think there's a real consciousness there, Louise.
Yeah.
I don't know, how do you feel about that in terms of the self-belief, the consciousness, conscious practice of developing self? What are your
I
thoughts
am
around that?
fully supportive of that. And in fact, when I talk boost your career, it starts with self. So self-awareness on all sorts of levels, and connecting beliefs, mindsets, attitudes, they create impact. So that a whole conversation around the difference between the intent that we have and the impact that we have, and all of that is conscious choice. And I'm
Yeah,
reminded of something that we talked about during the pandemic. I remember that we had a conversation that said the leaders that we're coaching at the moment are confused because they know how to be that leader, and it's been taken away from them. So the to-do list that they're used to working with is now the to-be list. Who do I need to be in this
yeah.
moment speaking with you? Because it's this medium again that we're all linked to. And
And I
that's
really love that analogy, from to do to be. I think
great,
that's
isn't
such a
it?
strong, yeah. And that leads on to, what are my behaviors,
Yeah.
and how do my behaviors need um, to shine, and be an extension of the values that I believe in, the organization values, to know when my behaviors are not where they need to be because of maybe where my mindset's at. And making that really conscious choice about who do I want to be in this organisation? How do I want to be seen?
And how
in
do
this
I then use that voice? And I think, because I was going to ask you, what do you see as the challenges? The biggest challenge that you've described is myself. How do I tap into conscious choice? How do I start to understand the difference between intent and impact? And how can I be conscious about that one as well? How do I consciously say yes? You use the word experiences. It's not just about going and attending a classroom and doing a lesson. It's more around, where do I find the different experiences that will allow me to develop? And that started me thinking about, you're an incredibly successful woman. You've worked in lots of organisations, both national and international organisations, and very high-level roles around organisational development and organisational change. How do you keep yourself motivated around your own development? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my love of learning, and I do have a love of learning, and I think that's important. My love of learning probably really started, I didn't start at school. I was not great. I was more socially motivated, shall I say?
Great way to put that.
More socially motivated than what I should have been. But when I went back, so I did my degree part-time while I worked. I did it the long, hard way of that. But I had the pleasure where we met at a university, and I think that connecting to education and seeing how education opens doors, not just, we've had the pleasure, both of us had the pleasure working on some AusAid projects in the early days, working with people in different countries. And that wasn't just in education, but also when I worked in mining, and seeing how education unlocks a whole range of worlds for people. So I became really passionate about lifelong learning. And I remember having a leader, a senior leader when I worked for Coca-Cola Amatil, and he came into a leadership program that I was running, and he talked about he learned something from people all the time. He never stops learning. And it was such a powerful thing for the people in the audience, the participants, to hear, because this is someone that's got a really strong career. He's an executive, and you think, oh, he's got it all under wraps. He knows what's going on. But you don't, and you never stop learning. And the world's changing so much that if you don't have a thirst for learning new things, kind of get stuck a little bit. So I think, having that real passion for lifelong learning, and I'm continuing. I did a mental health certification during the pandemic. I knew that was a big driver of how people were feeling, how I was feeling myself, how my daughter was feeling, and her struggles as a young woman, coming into the world of work. And so for me, it was great to get really involved in something different and new, but it was complementary to what I would do. So I'm always looking for little opportunities to do that.
Underscoring something in there. As I was listening, I thought what you're not explicitly stating is your not love, but your understanding of change and what adapting means, what flexibility means. So I get conscious choice, I get understanding self and making those decisions, I get understanding where the balance lies between my intentions and my impact, and making then the choices to make that happen. And there's something in there around my desire then to shift, to understand that change is good, shift is great, and that I need to adapt and be flexible. That's what I was hearing in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good, insightful underscore, Louise,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of my jobs have had those elements to it, so I naturally gravitate to that. I just think it's so important, we're here in in working and enjoying things, that to be adaptable, flexible, noticed when things are, this is the environmental radar, and what do I need, and the self awareness,
Mm.
again coming back to self. When do I need to shift? When do I need to grow? When do I need to change? When do I need to adapt? They're really great questions for us to consider as we are thinking about our career, because it's not linear and it's not black
No,
and white. There's lots of grey, there's lots of uncertainty. And I think within that element of adaptability, there has to be a level of comfort in uncomfortable spaces, of not knowing always the answer, and sitting within that and having the capacity to be able to sit in that uncomfortable spot for a period of time. And I think, again, that's a bit of a skill that we
I think
learn
that's a
over.
huge skill, and a new skill. Well, it's not a new skill. It's a skill that's even more fundamental in the hybrid world. That acceptance, that a state of dis-ease when I'm not at ease. I mean, dis-ease is actually a place of growth. So how do
Absolutely.
I embrace that then? Because in the moment, my reaction, my response, we could go into a whole other conversation here, making sure that I do react, that I take that breath, and that I accept that that's what's required.
And,
Fantastic.
and when you think about that in the hybrid world, there are times where you don't know what's going on because we're not in the office, we're not hearing the conversations.
Mm.
And so when you feel like you're out of the loop, that is an area of disease, of discomfort, of
Yeah.
uncertainty. And what do you play? How do you play into that? You've got a couple of choices.
Yeah.
You can go down the negative self-mind talk choice, or you can go down to, okay, well, what does this mean? Who do I need? The proactive, who do I need to check in with? Because I've missed that conversation. It wasn't purposeful. It's just the environment. So what proactive element do I need to do to reconnect with what's going on in this space that I'm missing out on? Because I wasn't in the office last Thursday at 4:00.
That's right.
It
And
was
it's
a
a
lot.
huge topic. Like, we started with the three issues that are culturally impacting organisations. We started looking at how that is creating a different emphasis for development for individuals, and then around how women can adapt all of that because they naturally have the skills to do this. And it is
Yeah.
tapping into that core part of their humanness and their ability to engage and relate to people. It's when you start talking about it, it's a huge topic. And I'm hoping
Oh, absolutely.
I'm hoping that you'll come back at some point so that we can pick up on a couple of those salient issues and perhaps explore them in more depth. In the
I'd
meantime,
love to, Louise.
good.
I'd love to come back.
Well, thank
Love
you.
the chat.
It's fun to have a chat, and that's what Boost Talk's all about. It's just being in conversation. So thank you so
And,
much.
and these conversations help us learn and grow.
I
They
know.
help us remember and reflect. So yeah, wonderful.
They do. Thank you so much for joining us. And I wish you every success. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you again soon on Boost Talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.
Hello, Louise Phelan here, and you've been listening to yet another Boost Talk, and I know you loved it. These women are being so generous with their time and their experience and their expertise, and it's great to have their perspective on their career enhancement strategies for women in this post-pandemic hybrid workplace that we find ourselves in. So for more information, head on over to our website, boostyourcareer.com.au, and I'll see you there.